Today is March 9th, 2025, and this is episode 299 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
299, that's crazy. How are you, sir?
I'm awesome. How are you?
Good. I see from the video that you're at your Southern Command location.
I am, and it is rocking and rolling outside. It's been storming. Well, we had Gail visited last week, so my dog was like a kite up on her leash, and now it's storming. So she's basically hiding under a bed in a different room, because she hates storms. So it's I think this coming week will be a little bit better, better weather.
So what you're saying is the Gulf of SpaceX debris is a little unsettled today.
It is. I didn't get to see the reentry. I'm disappointed because I think I could have.
Most people, I think, will get a shot soon. You posted a great idea that should be our new fireworks. It's just coordinated SpaceX spaceship reentries over various parts of the U.S.
Right.
What more could you ask
with
for?
Candy? Pack them full of candy?
Well, I don't know that that's going to survive, but let's try it. What the hell?
Or turkeys. So the other thing was turkey. Packing them full of turkeys.
As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
And then launching them on Thanksgiving Eve.
You know what? Why are you not in SpaceX marketing? Because this is brilliant.
I have all this time to think about these ideas now. Anyhow, I should probably have already said this, but the thoughts and opinions we express are ours and not those of our employers. And I'll also say thank you again to our Patreon sponsors. By the way, I'm going to be creating another channel for those of you who don't like Patreon. I know that there are more than a few. So probably this coming week, I'll have a Ko-Fi option available.
Nice. If you're cool, you would just have like a Bitcoin wallet. People could just anonymously send billions of Bitcoins to.
Yes. So all the ransomware actors could send their ill-gotten gains to us. Yeah.
It's true. We've kicked around the idea of offering something special for our Patreon donors, like a monthly Zoom call with us or something. I don't know if that's of interest to you. We don't want to subject ourselves on you if you're not interested, but if it is of interest to you, let us know. We'd be happy to set something up to reward those who are so incredibly generous with your money to help keep our little humble enterprise afloat. And we thank you.
Yes, that would be cool. Or perhaps an exclusive episode or
for all of your right. Exclusive episode for all of your, torturing needs for any people you're trying to get information out of. Force them to listen to us some more until they break.
That's right.
Anyway.
Oh, all right. So let's go ahead and jump into some stories. The first one today is from the Wall Street Journal. And again, Wall Street Journal is obviously behind a paywall, but I am very confident that y'all can figure out how to get around a paywall these days. The title here is: a Disney worker downloaded an AI tool. It led to a hack that ruined his life.
It's an ugly one.
Yeah, this is a very ugly one. So there is there was it is former employee now, a guy named Matthew Van Andel, who was an employee of Disney and apparently was playing around with AI. This was sometime early in 2024 on his home computer, by the way, not on his work computer, on his home computer. And he downloaded a repo off of GitHub, which apparently had a backdoor in it. And that backdoor led an adversary to obviously have access to his home computer, where he apparently had his 1Password installed. And that 1Password installation also had apparently his work credentials, as well as uh, some access cookies and various other credentials. I think it was a little unclear to me if he was logged into Disney's Slack from his home computer. I think he may have been, but that part's a little bit unclear. The headline of the story is that the adversary here used the credentials that were obtained from this personal computer to download something like 44 million chat logs from Disney's corporate Slack installation. And apparently this actor had access to this guy's computer, his home computer, for about 5 months. And at some point, I'm assuming the actor is a he, contacted Matthew and let him know that something bad was about to happen. And Matthew, I guess, originally filed it away as spam, and after a couple of back and forths, finally realized that it probably wasn't spam. Then contacted Disney's corporate security team after the actor said that they had they mentioned some things that were discussed in Slack. So basically, he knew that this person had been in the company's Slack system. So that triggered him to go talk to Disney security. Disney security confirmed that this guy's Slack account had been compromised, and then it's off to the races. Eventually, he was fired. Disney fired him for allegedly having accessed pornography on his work computer. Now, he claims that he did not access pornography on his work computer, and that this was a punitive retaliation for what happened. And so he's actually in the process of suing Disney for wrongful termination. I have no idea how that's going to turn out, but holy cow, it's very interesting because like nothing in here would have been detectable by the normal tooling that most organizations have. Like, you don't have your EDR agent running on your employee's home computer. So, that was, one of the things that really resonated with me in the story was how difficult this would be to defend against if you're using services like Slack and your employees are storing credentials in tools like 1Password that are, being accessed from non-work computers, which, by the way, is in some respects, 1Password makes that a little bit easy because they actually, if you're a corporate customer of 1Password, one of the perks you get is that your employees are able to use 1Password at home, for personal use, which is a great advantage, by the way. I'm not a knock on 1Password by any stretch. Like I'm a very happy customer, but that doesn't change the facts of the matter here.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think when you originally presented the stories, you might have mentioned LastPass. It was 1Pass.
1Password. Sorry,
1Password. Just to be clear, at least in the reporting I read,
it is You're right. It's 1Password.
Yeah.
Sorry. There is news about LastPass. It's a whole other. It's a whole.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing. To me, I was talking to Bob the other day, and he was mentioning that one of the companies that he is involved with, they lock down logging into their corporate devices and corporate systems only from company issued machines.
Mm-hmm.
They don't let personal devices in, which would alleviate a whole lot of this, right? So even if somebody gets a foothold on a personal machine, even if those passwords were shared over, which you could potentially prevent, of don't mix your corporate and personal password managers. If you had some sort of device trust or device tokens that only allowed certain corporate devices to log in, those passwords would still not be all that helpful. Or if you had full SSO, that because it implies that the threat actor here got the passwords and was logging in from other devices potentially. So full SSO potentially would stop that with proper multi-factor. If you lock it down to corporate devices, you lock it down with SSO, you don't allow personal devices to log in with static passwords, you might stop a lot of this. And that probably feels very locked down for a lot of personal devices and the BYOD environment we're in. But this is a perfect example of where it might make sense to not allow personal devices to log in that you can assure the security of.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think you can, the mitigation, as you said, would be to have Slack as an example authenticate against your SSO and
Mm-hmm.
have some sort of device authentication in addition to user authentication.
Right. So yeah, it's there's some other potential opportunities here. Depending if there was multiple devices logging in with this guy's accounts, you could have done some impossible travel detection of like, okay, he's logging in from Burbank. I don't know where he lives. I'm making this up. Burbank, California, and then 5 minutes later, somebody in Bangladesh is logging in. Okay, that's something you can trigger on with most tools. There's some opportunities that could have detected this. No idea about the whole pornography angle. At first, I was like, well, maybe the bad actor planted it, but if the bad actor never got direct access to his work machine, who knows? Uh,
Yeah,
no clue. We don't have any details.
There's not enough information to make any kind of judgment.
Yeah,
on that aspect. It was also interesting, by the way. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say also, maybe the core lesson is be careful what you download from the internet.
Yes. There were two other. I thought two other takeaways from this. Number one was he didn't have multi-factor authentication set up for access to his personal 1Password, because I don't think it was the corporate 1Password. I think it was his personal 1Password, but I think he had his, it's inferred at least that he had his company login stored in his personal 1Password vault. And that personal 1Password vault did not require multi-factor. And he also, by the way, stored his 2-factor credentials in the same 1Password vault. And now it wasn't directly said that he did that for his Disney ID, but it did say it for other quote social media and other accounts. Because apparently his after the attacker decided this victim wasn't taking it seriously enough, released lots of information, including logins to his social media accounts, which were then summarily hacked and used to post all kinds of hate speech and whatnot. So most social media these days requires multi-factor authentication, and it does pretty plainly say in there that he did store his multi-factor tokens inside 1Password, which, by the way, is becoming increasingly common. And so that's something to think about, because if somebody is able to access your wallet, and I'll go back to LastPass, because there's a whole other LastPass thing going on about, they had some issues a couple years ago that we're now learning that, the adversaries accessing the LastPass infrastructure is being used to steal data or steal money out of accounts. And I suspect in the end analysis, we're going to find that there too, people were storing their multi-factor token.
Yeah, which there's a whole convenience factor there, but when you get into a situation like this, you make it all very easy for your bad actors. So
yes,
it's an interesting one. I feel for the guy. It's a rough position to be in. The other thing that was interesting is based on the investigation from Disney's security team. They asked this victim to run some sort of malware scan on his personal device, which picked it up. So that also tells me he probably wasn't running good enough anti-malware. I don't know. I have no idea. But if something did detect it, and there was an opportunity that he, I don't know if Some people say Windows Defender, assuming it was a Windows box, is doing much better. Maybe it was a Linux box. I don't know. I don't know what. Maybe it was a Mac. I don't know what his personal device was, but
my guess is he was running Windows Defender and he downloaded Malwarebytes.
You might be right.
If I had to guess.
Yeah, you're probably right.
So moving on to our next story. This one is it's a little bit non-traditional. It's from medium.com. It's Kevin Beaumont's blog. It's doublepulsar.com is the domain. And the title here is Use One Virtual Machine to Own Them All. Active exploitation of VMware ESX hypervisor escape called ESXi Cape. Escape. I don't know how you say that. Anyway,
we're cool and hip, and we know words.
Escape. I don't know. I'm going to give up on that. Anyway, there are 3 separate CVEs. None of them are by themselves incredibly notable, but when chained together, they can actually lead to a VM escape. And that basically allows an adversary who has some sort of access in a virtual machine to get into the hypervisor. And once they're in the hypervisor, they can do all sorts of stuff. I can tell you, this is the kind of vulnerability when I was responsible for keeping a cloud secure that kept me up at night, because this is what kind of breaks the whole multi-tenant model, and that certainly is mentioned in this article. There are quite a few VMware hosting companies, and if they don't patch, a bad actor could certainly order a virtual machine, escape out of that virtual machine, and then go make the rounds and damage other customers' information. But even in a single tenant installation of VMware, a lot of times you'll have kind of mixed use stuff. And so you might have, as Kevin mentions in his post here, you might have like domain controllers, and you might also have your virtual desktop infrastructure. And we know that, as we just talked about, workstations are fairly ripe pickings for being compromised. And so that could then lead to, a normal user error, downloading, installing the wrong thing, could lead to a VM escape, which then is able, in turn, leads to the kind of complete compromise of your VMware infrastructure.
One thing that was a little unclear to me, it's just my ignorance around VMware ESX. All right, I moved from a guest VM up to the hypervisor. So now I've got control plane access. There's a comment in here that sort of led me to believe that also would give you enough to completely compromise all of the other guest VMs under that hypervisor. And I wasn't sure how, if that's true. I mean, yeah, you could break them, you could turn them off, you could modify them, but would you have admin level access automatically to
you
the
would
other
be able
guest
to
VMs?
You would be able to muck with file systems in all those other VMs. So you could kind of do the normal password recovery type thing. So that would be,
it's basically like having full physical access to a host at that point.
Correct. You would have logical access to the terminals. So if, for example, some VMs were logged into on the console, you would have access to that. That's probably not that common, I wouldn't imagine. It's not impossible to think. They mention, again, a lot of companies for many reasons run their Active Directory environment in VMware because it allows you can do vMotion between systems, and it allows for some high availability and disaster recovery scenarios. And it's mean, it's just a common deployment model. Well, now you have access to the Active Directory data stores, which, conceivably could allow you to, collect credentials out of those. So I will tell you, this was, I didn't have any, I didn't have this happen to me directly, but I've talked about in the past, I had quite a few suppliers who had issues with VMware. And like, this was something that happened time after time after time, where a supplier's firewall had been hacked, as we talked about in the past. And the adversaries had this like really well functioning playbook where they would then get into the VMware environment through a variety of different ways and launch their ransomware at the VMware level. So they were basically encrypting like the VM, the underlying VM data files, which, they didn't even require logical access into the individual virtual machines. They were actually encrypting at the VMware level. So I think that's, probably the most common, I don't want to undersell it, right? But kind of pedestrian type attack that you would see. But I think the point here is that it could lead to more sophisticated and harder to detect attacks because, the VMware ESX hypervisor doesn't allow for typical security tooling. Like you can't run your CrowdStrike or SentinelOne agent in your VMware hypervisor. And so, whatever happens in there, you tend to be blind to.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. The other thing that as you're talking, I was thinking about, so I've got 3 lower severity exploit or vulnerabilities that are chained together to give you, a very serious exploit and vulnerability. This kind of hurts some of our prioritization around vulnerability management discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Like just patch the highs and criticals if you've got to prioritize. Well, that doesn't account for this sort of situation where you're chaining together less critical vulnerabilities into something that becomes critical. So it makes it makes that discussion a little harder, right? When you're having it with your VM team of like, hey, you need to patch. Well, these are low, yeah, but you never know how something could get chained together into something a lot more critical. And it's very tough to anticipate how clever a bad actor might be based on CVSS scoring and as a point in time view of that. So it argues again for patch everything you can patch, which is easy to say, tough to do. I get that. The good news is it does appear that there are patches out for this particular situation now, finally. But for a while, it looks like these were 0 days that were running around without any patches.
Yeah, they were being exploited before there were patches. Now, as far as I can tell, the exploits aren't public. So there is an actor or one or more actors out there exploiting it, but it's not a situation where the exploits are common knowledge yet.
Other interesting takeaway, an out of support version is also impacted. So no patches are going to be made available for that. Another argument to don't run end of life out of support software.
That was one that concerned me a little bit in the context of VMware, because I think most people, especially those who run VMware, understand that they were recently acquired by Broadcom, and Broadcom like increased the cost to them radically, and so I think it's one of the concerns I have, especially in that context, is that some companies may have opted not to renew their licenses under under the new Broadcom agreement, and so they may be running back level versions that don't have patches available. So again, in the context of like, I think a lot of companies run patch management programs, not vulnerability management programs. And so if your vulnerability scanner doesn't come back and tell you that, hey, your ESXi 5.5 has a patch available, like it just doesn't come up on the radar.
Hopefully, something comes back and tells you it's end of life, though.
Well, so yes, now I believe all of the major vulnerability management platforms actually rate those as either high or critical vulnerabilities. So if you're running something out of date, but the issue is that if you're doing it on purpose, you've probably quiesced that alert.
Yep. And so you're not even aware of this problem.
Exactly. Until you read about it on a blog or you hear about it here. So
Right.
that's the concern I have. Is that I think there has to be a pivot a bit to more vulnerability management, which again, I think touches on the comment that you made, that it's not all about just raw severity. You have to have some context around it. And in this instance, the context is that on their own, they might not be individually significant, but when combined together, they're about as bad as you can get in the context of a VMware environment.
Yeah. So it's a good argument for, hey, go start knocking down those mediums in your environment that you didn't worry about.
Yes.
The other thing that I take away from is there's just general good hygiene at keeping as current as you can on your software, because when you do have a problem like this, it's usually less painful to get patched. Now
Mm-hmm.
there are other inputs to that equation, and there are some operational considerations and production impacts. But I try to tell folks, at least don't be more than one major version away from current release. If you get too far behind, when you get into a crisis, it takes too much effort to get patched up, and now you're kicking the can further and further down the road. So if you're just on a regular cadence, patching to at least N-1, regardless if there's vulnerabilities, I think if you build a program around that, you put yourself in a much better position to respond nimbly when something like this comes up without causing yourself a lot of pain. You spread that pain out.
Absolutely. I mean, inevitably, you'll run into issues where there's some, there's a breaking change. And if you wait until you have a compelling need to patch to deal with that breaking change, now you not only have to deal with the downtime and the headache, but you also have to deal with the breaking change on an emergency basis. So completely agree with the point there. All right. So moving on, the next story we have is from the Register, and the title here is "Developer Sabotaged Ex-Employer with Kill Switch Activated When He Was Let Go." It has been, I feel like it's been 20 years since I've seen a story like this.
Nah, it happens from time to time. It has to have.
Yeah. Yeah. So the deal here is a guy named Davis Liu worked for Eaton Corporation from 2007 through 2019. So this, by the way, happened a while ago. This happened like almost 6 years ago. But the new news is that his court case just concluded. And spoiler alert, he was found guilty of actually a crime. So he hasn't been sentenced yet, but he probably will not be treated kindly. Be my expectation. So anyhow, he was a developer for Eaton, and he created oversimplifying, right? But he created a job that ran on a development server that queried Active Directory to see if his ID was still there. And if his ID was not still there, it launched a series of attacks. It attempted to delete other employee data. It started spawning jobs to prevent other people from logging into the system, and so on and so forth. And I think at one point it locked like tens of thousands of people out of their accounts. So, according to the company, it caused quite substantial damage. Which I'm assuming that is real and not hyped up, but again, gosh, we I think have gotten into this routine of really trusting employees, and we've thought about the threat as being outside of our doors, and this is a good reminder, along with other things, like even the story about we talked about a little bit ago with Disney. Just because the adversary that is actually launching the bad actions is outside, they may be doing it with with the context of your employees, and so identifying kind of sensitive operations and areas, and improving the protections and monitoring around those goes a long way. It's not necessarily that you're going to distrust your employees, but in the current world that we live in, you don't know if it's a bad actor or if it's somebody acting on behalf of one of your employees to doing bad things. Not sure I'm saying that very well.
Yeah, it's a tough one. At some point, you have to trust somebody with the keys to the kingdom, whether
Yes.
it's your admin team, your security team, and if you're subtle enough and you're smart enough, there are ways to do bad things like this.
Yeah, and I don't think,
And
by the way, this person had particularly high permissions. Like, I don't think he was I don't think he was
he
like
must have
part
had
of
enough
the.
permissions to disable AD logins.
Yeah. Well, so the one thing that it's a little unclear, but I think that what he was doing was launching a denial of service attack. So basically, like, he was locking those accounts out.
I read that. It is unclear. It seemed like that portion was like he began testing. Just quoting from the article, he wrote a Java program that would, in infinite loop, create more and more non-terminating threads that would consume more and more resources, and the computer running the code crashed. So that's more a straight denial service.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like his AD enabled in AD was more along the lines of, as soon as he saw his account move to disabled, it locked other accounts automatically. So to me, that feels like he had the permissions, but maybe we can dig in and read a little more detail. But that's how I interpret it, at least, is that he had the permission to say, with his account, or at least with the Surface account that was running this code, go disable other accounts.
It's it. So I guess where my mind went was that you don't necessarily need that permission, because if you are able to enumerate all the accounts, you can just run a job that attempts to log into each one over and over and over again until they get locked out. And
Right.
and so I was assuming that's what he was doing,
Yeah.
but it's also possible that he did have some sort of administrative privileges that let him lock those.
Either way, it was rude.
It's very
not nice.
Very rude. And now he's effed around, and now he's about to find out, as the kids say these.
Yeah, going to federal prison, and there's a phrase there from Office Space I won't say because it's a family friendly show.
It's very unkind.
But
yeah.
This is back to your point. This is a tough one to defend against, and I don't know. Maybe more auditing of Surface accounts running suspicious code. I don't know. That's a tough one.
Certainly making sure that you're properly limiting privileges. Again, I think that this is likely a situation where that may have happened, right? I could see this same attack happening where this person didn't have elevated privileges beyond what he needed to do his job. But certainly, looking for instances where you have random systems trying to enumerate your Active Directory. That by the way is not like that's a useful thing even outside the context of this, because that could be an indication of reconnaissance activity from any number of different types of attacks and so on. So but like you said, this is going to be really difficult to stop. And at some point, like if you got a criminal in your organization who's hell-bent on doing something bad like this, it is very difficult to stop unless you're willing to implement some pretty onerous controls, which I suspect most organizations aren't willing to.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, but just remember, kids, don't do this. Like, I get it. I get it. There's a lot of kind of counterculture, anti-corporate sentiment right now. You know what? I was let go from a big company, but this industry is small. I know that it seems like it's huge and whatnot, but all at the end of the day, all you have is your the ethics and your reputation, and crap like this just sink you for life. Don't do it. Be the bigger person.
Yeah. Someday when I'm not in the industry anymore, I can spill some more tea on some of the terrible bad ethics I've seen. And you're always tempted to do things the easier way. And I'm not saying it's karma, but I'm saying people notice. You might get away with it first 20 times, but maybe not the 21st.
But look at especially in this context where like clearly the person was worried about losing his job, right? And so like he didn't help himself out. Now he's going to be probably going to prison. I'm going to guess, just because that's the way these kinds of things work. But best case, he's pretty much locked himself out of the industry, even if he didn't go to prison. Who's going to trust you? So like if your concern is losing your job, like this is the last thing that you really should be thinking about. My view.
On the upside, he solved his housing and food problems.
He did. And healthcare.
And healthcare, sorta, mostly, kinda. Plenty of companionship opportunity available for him too in prison.
Right. Our next story comes from Ars Technica, and the title here is Copilot exposes private GitHub pages, some removed by Microsoft. This was very, on the one hand, it was surprising, and on the other hand, it surprising. So a security company called Lasso had discovered in some investigation that Bing cache, so the search engine Bing, maintained a cache that allowed ongoing access into GitHub repositories that had been once public, later turned private, but were indexed at some point when they were public. And that cache remained available even after the repos were made private. And by the way, like as they point out in this story, that's not an uncommon thing. A lot of companies struggle with this issue where either an employee's uploaded some code to a public repository that was not intended to be public, like it's proprietary source code, or the more common issue, which is mentioned here, the code turned out to contain embedded secrets, which we've talked a lot about. Like this is really pervasive problem that we have in the industry, hard-coded credentials. One of the first, like almost every organization in their playbook, when they find something like this, the very first thing they do is turn that repository private, because it's viewed as like, okay, we're cutting off, we obviously we have to go figure out something bad happened, but we're going to at least make sure that it doesn't keep happening. We're going to stop the bleeding, and then we can go figure out how much blood we lost. But what they found here was that, that you were still bleeding, you just didn't realize it through Bing Cache. So Lasso contacted Microsoft, and Microsoft made some changes to Bing in their caching system, so that those repositories that were once public, now private, did not appear in the cache. However, Lasso then found that Microsoft's AI agent, Copilot, has access to the now private Bing cache. And so it continues to have access to these old, once public, now private code repositories. And if you know how to ask correctly, and there's obviously a whole industry, spinning up around figuring out how to ask creative questions to your favorite AI engine, you can get it to provide code that was once was taken offline. And in fact, they talk about a specific example where Microsoft had gone after a code repo that allowed abuse of, ironically enough, Copilot, and basically kind of oversimplified, jailbreaking Copilot, and they were able to get basically a court agree that should not be public, and they got it taken down. However, their own Copilot continues to provide access to that same code that they got taken down through the courts. And the point here is that if you ever had code that was available and you later turned public or turned from public to private in a repository, it is entirely possible that it was indexed and is available through Copilot if somebody is smart enough to know how to ask. So,
or other systems.
Or others. Yeah. I mean, it's obviously talking about Copilot. I think Copilot is an interesting case because of the tight binding between Bing's search engine and crawling in cache and the agent.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've seen a ton of issues with stuff inadvertently marked as public that should have been private, or people publishing to the wrong repo, and how quickly those get scanned and indexed by both researchers and threat actors. They're very good at finding that stuff. So my position has always been, if it's ever public, assume it's always public. And I think it even says in the article, like, you can never assume just switching it to private solves the problem. You have to rotate the secrets.
Yeah, you can't unring the bell. Like, no. It doesn't matter in what. And look, I'm gonna go off on a tangent, right? You put something on the internet, it's forever. Like, it's never going away. And I don't care if that's, some stupid off-color joke to Facebook, or committing a secret into a GitHub repo. Like, it's forever. You have to assume that it has been indexed, it's been cached, it's been screenshotted, it is there. And so you touched on it, right? In this instance, if the issue that caused you to turn the repository from public to private was the existence of keys, like, you can't rely on making it private as the solution. Like, you've got to rotate those keys. And I'll go further and say you should be rotating them anyway.
Yeah, but who does? That's like washing your underwear, man. You're supposed to, but nobody does it.
Who does that?
No, it's an interesting problem, and it's a problem. Like I asked, one problem I see over and over and over and over again is how easy it is to get confused when you're about to submit code. Is this a public or private repo? It is a very common problem
Yeah.
across GitHub, GitLabs, whatever. It's just a massively easy to make a mistake there, and you run into problems. And to your point, 100% agreed. If it's ever exposed, you have to assume that it was indexed, it was captured. What's interesting to me is that Microsoft has taken the stance of trying to block these cached pages, which to me feels like you're playing whack-a-mole anyway. And I don't know, it feels an inelegant solve versus, hey, we index and cache things. And if you made it public, that's on you. Don't do that. And it's like you said, trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. It's because okay, great, you get it scrubbed from Copilot or Bing or their caching engines. There's probably others that captured it too. Now they're closer to it and faster, but they have no monopoly on that.
No, I'm sure Google is doing the same thing, and OpenAI is doing this. Like, almost all of the AI agents. I'm just picking on AI for a second right now. Like, all of the AI agents have built their own crawling infrastructure because that's how they train their stuff. So they have huge repositories of data that they've crawled, and that stuff is sitting around, and they're not going back to see if a repository that they scanned or crawled and made a copy of is now private. Like that's not what they do. So I do like the you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube analogy. That was very apt metaphor.
Yes. And by the way, that was in the article.
Yes.
I'm stealing it from the article just to give credit where credit is due.
Fair enough. Anyway, I will say in prior lives, the employers I've had have had internal enterprise GitHub repositories, but I've also had had a presence on GitHub.com, and that GitHub.com presence is not uncommon because a lot of IT companies want to show like thought leadership, and they want to provide sample code to interface with their wares or what have you. And so even if you provide the tooling that creates kind of a safe space for your employees to commit their stuff to, which by the way, like, we can have a separate discussion about, like, is it okay to still include keys in source code that's only accessible internally? Like that's
true.
It's not a bad. I mean, it's not a good thing either. But you still have a point of confusion because you've got developers who are at the end of the day people with deadlines and milestones and family stuff and making bad decisions about where to post what. So I would say don't sit back and say, well, we like everything's in a internally controlled enterprise GitHub repo or GitLab repo, because that could create a false sense of security for you.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. Well said.
And then the last story we have for today comes from darkreading.com, and the title is Third-Party Risk Tops Cybersecurity Claims. This story is about a report from a company who surveys the cyber insurance industry. So they release an annual report, and this is a readout of their 2024 report. There were some interesting takeaways, and one of them is that third parties, as the headline would lead you to believe, is becoming a very dominant source of cyber risk. And I don't think that's necessarily surprising, given all the stories that we talk about. If you think about things like, Snowflake and um, was it Power School and on and on. A lot of data is being lost by these third parties, and I think it's not necessarily a surprise because from an adversary perspective, it's one-stop shopping. Like I can go and I can attack, like 100 companies individually, or I can go to one service provider. And if I'm able to affect that one service provider, like I can damage, you know, perhaps hundreds of end companies.
Yeah, and put more pressure on them to pay
Right.
because it's now just their own company that's disrupted. It's their customers as well who are heavily disrupted, who are now putting pressure on the parent or the service provider or the SaaS, whatever, to go pay.
Right. And certainly ransomware, both as it pertains to ransomware directly impacting an entity and impacting an entity via a service provider are both significant sources of loss as measured through cyber insurance. It from a loss perspective, magnitude of loss perspective, it's much larger on the direct attack, but it's much more common on it's happening more frequently through third parties. So if you combine those two, like you're over half the overall losses, material losses, I think is what they call them. Over half are coming from ransom, which is huge. And then the second after that is transfer fraud, which is I would describe this as like the end result of the business email compromise attacks, where trying to change where vendors are paid, or pretending to be your CFO demanding a check to be paid to an acquisition or what have you. So ransomware is it, which we've talked about quite a lot. I don't think there's any particular surprise
Yeah.
in that, but I think ransomware has like just totally transformed the industry, the security industry.
What's interesting, by the way, is the end of this article. They mention that phishing is less effective, where they say vendors became a leading cause of losses for companies. Phishing attacks against policyholders led to fewer claims in 2024, 9% versus 20%. I, I struggle with that. I think I don't know if that's a phishing is still something we see. I think one stat I saw was involved in 80% of successful compromises in some way, shape, or form. So I wonder if this is just the way they're slicing and dicing the data,
I,
because phishing and social engineering is still massively
so I
impactful.
that struck me as odd as well. And on the one hand, I think I think you're right. But on the other hand, like phishing itself doesn't typically lead to a loss, right? Phishing is the way that ransomware happens. It's the
Yeah, it's
way
the
that a
initial.
business email
Yeah,
compromise happens. It's the way that some other attack happens. It's a methodology in a variety of attacks. It's not necessarily its own. So it leads me to wonder, like, what is like, what were they counting as phishing
right.
in terms of harms? I don't
Like
know.
just a direct phishing, send us money
I
fraud
guess.
versus a malware foothold that led to something else that led to something else that led to ransomware. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah, I
mean,
agree. It's just
phishing is not going away.
no, no. Social engineering is still incredibly impactful and a huge threat. Which is why I struggle when I see something like that. I'm like, well, somebody could take the wrong conclusion from that, because I would imagine most of these ransomware situations began with some sort of social engineering, most likely.
Right. Right. We know that it's, that especially with AI. I don't mean to keep picking on AI, but here I am. Especially with AI, I think we're seeing phishing become much more, dare I say, effective. Like, it's becoming much. The adversaries are able to craft what would have in the past been considered spear phishing, but now they're able to do it at scale. Like you can, harvest information off the LinkedIn and other data sources at scale and send highly targeted you know lures to people. So I think we're
with
I mean, I
full
don't want
proper
to
English and
exactly
contextual native speaker skills
right. And in the
available to anyone.
context of the lure, right? So
Mm-hmm.
and for that reason, I actually think we're on the cusp of seeing, maybe it's already happening and hasn't really been reported on widely yet, but I think we're on the cusp of like a broad resurgence of phishing as a very effective attack mechanism because of AI.
Yeah, I was watching a demonstration. Man, I really want to credit her. I'll go find it or maybe put it in the show notes. But she was doing a demo of how easy it is to do a deep fake live video manipulation of a face to the target's face and voice to the target's voice in real time live over a Zoom type session. It
Mm-hmm.
was incredibly impactful, and it's cheap and it's easy now. And so you could easily now commit a social engineering attack where you're getting on a Zoom session with someone and present a valid face and a valid voice of the executive you're trying to imitate, which is super effective and probably will fool many, many people. And that's current state. It's just going to get better from here.
That's scary. It's really
Yeah.
scary.
And,
You're because the oft cited education of like, make sure you know who you're talking.
right.
That starts to break down.
It was Rachel Tobeck who did the
Ah,
demonstration.
okay.
Sorry. So she's CEO of Social Proof Sec. I'm sorry, I didn't recall that immediately, but I want to give her credit. So she does some pretty good demonstrations of that are very uh, executive friendly of what the state of this art is that are worth circulating to your executive team. And by the way, just to go to the next step, how would you defend against this? What I would say is have processes that are built to be resistant to this in your company. Like if you need to authorize money transfer, there should be methodologies that are resistant to deepfake social engineering attacks through some mechanism of positive control of multiple people who, have some sort of known authenticator, whatever it may be. Uh, that isn't just a very convincing deepfake from your CEO say transfer $20,000 to this account in China.
Right.
But I think many companies would fall for this right now. I think they would
Oh
be,
yeah.
especially smaller companies, would be very susceptible to this sort of problem.
100%. So I think getting back to the article, I think the lesson certainly is ransomware is on the upswing. Everything that we see indicates that trend is going to continue. We've talked endlessly about all the various options that we have for defending against ransomware, and certainly that is going to continue to be an arms race. But it's one that we have to pay attention to because it is not going away. This is the world we live in, and the investment that we make in controls to mitigate ransomware, both directly and via our third parties, is going to pay. It's going to pay off. I can tell you from firsthand experience, vendors, especially smaller vendors, less sophisticated vendors, can be a really large source of headaches. And it's not just like they're kind of like the Target / Home Depot, they're providing an avenue into your organization kind of scenario. It's, just like they have data about your customers. And once that the data they have about your customers or your employees is impacted by ransomware, even if it's benign data, that becomes a massive headache. You have an obligation to report it to regulators, to report it to your customers. Um, even though it might not be super sensitive data, you could be fined, you could be sued. Even though like it wasn't you, it was it was one of your third parties. So you've got to really pay attention to your supply chain.
So what you're saying is more spreadsheets that you want them to fill out on the third-party risk management side.
Yeah, I'll go back to like if I could say like one thing to focus on with your suppliers is make sure their firewalls are patched and under maintenance. Like if I could just say, you could just get them to do one thing, that one thing would make a huge difference in my experience.
But let's be realistic.
I
It's a
know.
lie.
I know. They will.
Of course we patch.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm a cynical old man. I've seen it too many times. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, wait a minute. How did this happen? Well, our firewalls weren't patched, but you said they were on your third-party risk management form. Yeah. So what?
Well, what they'll almost exclusively, by the way, like the vendor management questionnaires will say something like, "Are they patched or otherwise risk mitigated?"
Right.
And so there's like you can drive a truck through that wording. Right. Because what that means to me is different than what it means to you, and everybody has a very different opinion. And by the way, like if in the instance of an out of support firewall, there aren't any patches. So, like, are you current on patches? Yes.
Absolutely. All available patches have been applied.
Yes, we are current on patches. We run our vulnerability scanner, and it says we are not missing any patches.
Oh, it hurts. It hurts.
Which, by the way, I really, really dislike with a burning passion. I dislike the BitSite security scorecard type.
Oh yeah,
companies, but they can provide a little bit of insight into that sort of thing about your suppliers.
But 90% of the time, when I get a report from one of those, the IP ownership is wrong.
So 90% is like generous compared to what I've seen.
Especially with a bunch of cloud stuff and elastic IP address assignment and such. It's I don't want to talk too much about current work environment, but most places I've been where you get customers sending you that stuff from their own security scorecard view of the organization I was with, most of the time was just bad info.
Yeah,
but trying to convince a customer of that is an interesting challenge.
I dare say those services are all but useless for any kind of cloud or SaaS provider.
Yeah.
Because
and sometimes their services feel a little extortionary, like, well, you should sign up and we'll help you. No, you should stop reporting bad information.
Yes. I mean, look, when I worked at a cloud provider, we had hundreds of millions of IP addresses, and it was absolutely maddening because we would have, at the end of the end of the quarter, right? Some salesperson would come along and say, "Hey, like we've got this customer who's about to sign this $3 trillion deal.
Right.
And they're all ready to sign, but they have this security scorecard or this BitSite reporter. I forget all of the other providers that show that we have these out of date WordPress, like, and it would be like 400 pages of stuff. And, they need a response back by tomorrow. Like, what are you kidding? Like, this is all customers. So I'm very sympathetic to that.
It's maddening. And what usually is the case is you don't have a very sophisticated security analyst who's sending it up, because the ones who like are experienced know that most of this stuff is fluff, or they go validate it themselves. So the ones who are reporting are usually the ones who are very tough to convince that this is a false positive, because they just believe the tooling. So I'm not a fan of those services, but they tell you how incredibly impactful and useful and important they are.
Absolutely. They're very proud, very proud. And I do agree with your comment about them being extortionary, because almost to a T, they all are very willing to work with you to clarify any problems if you would just become a subscriber.
Yeah. Yep.
Which feels very, very dirty to me.
Yeah. So I don't have a lot of sympathy. And usually when I get a cold email or a cold call from one of those businesses, they typically get on the block list very fast. And hey, if they don't like that, then don't put out scammy information.
But the point remains, your suppliers, even those that might not seem like they're doing a lot of really sensitive stuff, can impart risk on you, ways that might not be obvious until something bad happens. So I still go back to it. It makes sense to the extent you can do something meaningful. I am a firm believer, as I know you are, that the spreadsheet dance that we do is all but worthless. But at the same time, doing nothing isn't the right answer.
You know what it does give you? I'll give you one upside.
What's that?
It gives ammunition for the security team to push the business to do certain things that customers are asking for.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's all I got.
That's a good point.
I'm trying to find some silver lining there.
No, it's actually a really good point. Yeah. But that's you as a, as the receiver of the spreadsheet, right. Not necessarily you as the sender.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Anywho,
that is the show for this week. I do apologize for no show last week. I was traveling and we just couldn't make it work. So my bad. That's all on me.
I forgive you.
Thank you. I am starting to produce YouTube Shorts again. It's fun and exciting. By the way,
I do appreciate.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say I'm waiting for you to start producing YouTube Jorts. Actually,
Skorts. Yes.
Skorts.
YouTube
sorry,
Skorts.
I completely interrupt your flow. I'm sorry for a stupid joke. Go back to you.
I did want to say, because I've had several people come to me and say, hey, at one point you guys were recording video, and that seemed to have fallen off. I want to make sure, if you're listening to this on YouTube and you don't have video, that's because you're at the wrong place. There is a video feed for, I think, the last 30 episodes at least, that you can find on our YouTube page. So we definitely are full on video now.
And we're sorry.
Yes. Not that sorry. Not sorry enough to stop. It's just very clear. So, I also feel compelled to say, like, the whole like, subscribe, comment, favorite, forward, because like that's what you do when you're on YouTube now, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's true.
Anyway, I appreciate everybody's time. Hopefully this was useful to you. You can find links to all the stories we talked about on our website at defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 299 and you'll find them. I'll also drop a link to our Patreon Patreon page in case you would like to help support our cause. When I have our Ko-Fi set up, I'll also put a link to that as well. And you can find me on social media. I'm pretty much only on Mastodon now. You can find me at jerry@infosec.exchange. And where can they find you?
Also on your fine Mastodon server at lurg, L-E-R-G, at infosec.exchange, and on X at lurg, L-E-R-G.
With that, we will talk again next week. Take care, everybody.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.